Hello and welcome back to Diary.io, and in this video I'm going to be talking about archiving of files and compression, what the different commands and programs that we can use to do all of these things on the terminal. Now let's get straight into it. I'm quite certain that from the word archive and the word compression or compress, you already have an idea of what we're about to talk about. And archiving basically means a way to have our files stored in an historical manner, such that a group of files can be put together and basically taken to some location. And compression, on the other hand, is a way to take files or directories and reduce them in terms of the size that they hold on the disk. And so sometimes it is useful to store a group of files in one file so that they can be backed up, easily transferred to another directory, or even transferred to a different computer entirely. And with compression, on the other hand, it is also sometimes useful to compress files into one file so that they can use less disk space and download faster. And having said all of that, it is very important to understand the difference and relationship between archiving a file and compressing a file. An archived file is a collection of files and directories that are stored in one file. The archived file is not compressed. It uses the same amount of disk space as all the individual files and directories combined in it. A compressed file, on the other hand, is a collection of files and directories that are stored in one file and stored in a way that it uses less disk space than all the individual files and directories that are combined together. So if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of disk space on your computer, from time to time you might decide to compress your files together, maybe once a week, so that you can reduce the amount of disk space used by your files and delete the original files. So the compressed file can be used later on in the future by uncompressing them to bring back the original files. Now most of this concept will start to make a lot more sense to you by the time we get on the terminal. So first off, let's have a look at what archiving is and what command we can use to archive a file or directory. I'm gonna download a file from the internet from my GitHub account like we did in one of the videos previously, and that file is called vars.yaml. And with this I'm gonna introduce one new command to you, which is du. And what I want to do with du is to check the file size for this. Even though with ls-l we can see what the size is, but I like to see it in a more human readable manner. As you can see with du, which means disk usage, we can see that this file is 80 kilobyte. And what I like to do is to rename this file, not for anything specifically, but just to have something more readable. So I'll just name it doc1. Okay, so now let's make more copies of this doc file. So doc1, and this time I'm going to use copy because I want to make a copy. Doc2, and let's see, and let's make one more copy. Why not? Doc3. Oops. If I do a disk usage on all doc files, as you can see, the asterisk there is just to say everything after doc, and in this case we have doc 1, 2, 3. So now we know each of the documents have 80 kilobyte. To archive these files, I would introduce you to another command, which is tar. And tar is just an archiving tool. Like I said before, it's not going to reduce the size of the files. It's just going to organize them in just one file and then make them all accessible as just one file. And it takes in a couple of parameters or flags, and the first one is C, which means create. So I want to create a new tar file or an archive file, and the next flag is V. I like to use V. Well, this V is optional. V means verbose. Anytime you hear the word verbose, basically means to print out as much information about the operation or what the program is doing on the screen. The last flag is F, which means file. So what's the name of the file that I want to call the new tar file or the archived file? And I'm just going to name it archived, and it has to have an extension of tar to signify that it's an archived file or a tar file. And after that, then I specify the files that I want to be included in this archived file. And just like I did before, I'll just say doc with an asterisk to say all the doc files. And because I use the V command, it's just printed out everything on screen to say, hey, I'm putting all these doc files into this archive file. If we do an ls, now we have this new archive file. And what I like to do is to use the du command again to see whether or not this file has changed in size. And if you multiply 80 kilobyte times 3, sure enough, it's going to give us 240 kilobyte. That's to show you that the size hasn't changed at all. It has only just taken all of these files and put them all together in one file. And there's another way in which we can see the content of this file. If we do tar -t with a verbose file as well, and the name of the file, which is archived, you can see that it's just literally doing an ls just to print back to us the content of this file. And some of the use cases for these type of things could be, rather than attaching many individual files to an upload to an FTP site or to an email or anything like that, you could just upload one tar file. Or if we wanted to send all of these files to a remote server somewhere else around the world, if it's not too big, we can just use some tool to send the file alone. Now this is going to take us into the next concept about compression. So compression is going to help us to reduce the size further. There are three major or most popular compression tools on Linux, and I'm going to walk us through all three of them. The first one, which is the most recommended one, is the Gzip 2. With Gzip 2, we can get as much as 90% off of this and turn this file to as low as 24K. How awesome is that? So if I ran Gzip 2 against the archive.tar and do an ls, as you can see, it's now a tar.bz2 file. Why don't we do a du against that file and see how much we have saved? Sure enough, we have 24 kilobyte. How about if we want to uncompress using another program that is able to read bz2 file and extract all the files within it? Now that will be gzip2 command, and if we pass in this file to it and we do an ls, it's basically going to give us back our tar file. And if we deleted all these doc files, now that we have our archive.tar file back, what if we wanted to get back all the doc files within it? That will be tar with a flag. Rather than use C like we did previously, we're going to use X for extract. So tar -x verbose file, and what's the name of the file? archived.tar. And you must have noticed I've been using my tab to complete the name of the file for me. And because I used verbose, I can see all the files on the screen. But what if we do an ls? Now we have all our files back. Now let's clear our screen and introduce the next compression tool, which is the Gzip. So if I pass our file, the tar file, to Gzip and do an ls, you can see we now have another type of compressed tar file, which in this case is not bz2, it is Gzip. And so if we did a du minus h against the new compressed tar file, you notice we have a 48 kilobytes of file size. So Gzipped, like I said previously, is the most recommended in terms of disk space saving, and with Gzipped you can get the most out of disk space saving as compared to the gzip command. But of course, in IT generally, things like this come at a cost. So if one program is going to perform in one area than another program, what you need to be wary about is what are the costs to this. And most of the time the cost is going to be related to the compute resource used by the program to do what it's doing. Imagine we had a very huge amount of file, let's say it's about 2 terabytes, and we're trying to decide whether we should use Gzip or Gzipped. Of course, we will get a lot more savings with Gzipped, but then it's going to require a lot of CPU resource, because with compression comes with algorithms that does all the background work, which obviously relies on the power of your computer to be able to do what it has to do. So bear this in mind. If you're not too worried about the amount of disk space you want to save, and you have a really large file, you have to make these decisions based on the fact that you know the costs that are associated with it. Now, what if we want to uncompress a gzipped file? Now, the command to use is gunzip. So if I pass the name of the file to gunzip, we'll basically have our tar file back. And remember how we uncompressed, or rather unarchived, our tar file, which was using the -x flag. With this command, we'll be able to get our original set of files back. And I'm not going to run that because we've done that already. But that will take us now to the final program for compressing a file, and that will be zip. With zip, it's slightly different in the sense that we would have to provide it with the name in which we want our file to become, and in this case I want it to be archive.tar.zip. Remember, in the previous ones we just give it the name of the tar file and it creates the compressed file with the appropriate file extension. But with zip, we have to specify what file extension we want to give to it, in which case this is a zip file. And so we then specify the tar file, and sure enough it's shown that this has been deflated by 81%. And if we do an ls, we can tell that we have our archive.tar.zip file. If we did a du on the newly created zip file, as you can see, we have 48 kilobyte back out of the whole 240 kilobyte. And to uncompress this, what we need to do in this case, we are going to first, let's say we don't have our archive.tar file. So I've removed it. To have it back, we have to do unzip and give it the tarred zip file. And as you can see, it's inflating the file back to the archive.tar. If we do an ls, we sure enough have our archive.tar file back. Something to bear in mind is with each of all of these compression tools, there are ways in which you can create your compressed file such that it is protected with password. And I'm not going to show that in this video. I'd like you to take a step out of your comfort zone and do a research on how to compress your own files, but this time protect them with a password. And if you do that successfully, make sure you put a comment in the comment box section below the video. Now before I go, there is one more bonus I'd like to give to you, and that is what if I wanted to create a tar file and compress it at the same time without first doing a .tar before then choosing compression tool to create a compressed file? Let's have a look at what that actually means. So what I like to do first is to remove all the archive files. Let's remove everything, and we're going to create an archived file and at the same time make it a compressed file. To do that, I would say tar -c to create the archived file, v for verbose. Now this time I'm gonna put z to say I want it to be zipped up, and finally f to specify the tar and zipped file to be created, and in this case I'm going to say archive.tar.gz. Oops, sorry about that. And the files that I want to be zipped up, if we did an ls on that, as you can see, just in one command we now have a tar file that has been zipped up. If we did a du on this new file, what we have is 48k. What if I remove all the files, all the doc files? We will just say tar extract v z f, and what all this mean, don't forget -x to extract verbose, the zip and the file which has been gzipped, and if you said enter, we just have all our files back, and now we have each of them back at 80 kilobyte. So this is how archiving and compression works in Linux. I do hope this has been informative for you, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification button. See you in the next video.